Hello, welcome to Learning Through Experience. Today, I am delighted to be able to talk about an artwork that is now in Evans Hall at Yale School of Management. And this podcast episode is with the artist, the very talented Mario Moore. We're going to talk primarily about Mario's work broadly and hard focus on his work called Black Governors, which is now installed at Yale School of Management. So let me tell you how this process came to be. We at the School of Management are lucky enough to have an art committee that helps us to impact the experience of people in the building, the people who are both learning here in degree granting programs and who have the chance to be here in shorter programs and to just visit the building. People have an experience of this place that includes the art. And we wanted to do something that really lifted up something about leadership and agency. And the art committee considered many people and came to a decision about Mario Moore's work because he has vibrant storytelling about agency, and it was really inspiring to the committee and people that we consulted. So I'm here to be able to welcome Mario Moore. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Mario Moore's works are rooted in historical references that draw parallels between the social, economic, and racial occurrences of the present. The work that he does is based in figurative realism, and his large-scale paintings tell stories of his own life along with those of friends and family. The figures in his creations are powerful and resilient, and it's demonstrated through the control of their gaze. So pay attention to where people are looking, where they're located, as we talk about these pieces. Mario Moore was born and raised in Detroit, has an MFA from Yale School of Art, and it has been an absolute delight to work with in this process. I've learned a lot. We've started this conversation in 2021. It took us years to be able to come to the work that is now installed and displayed. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Enjoy the stories within stories and come back and take a look at the piece again and again. For me, it's been changing over time as I experience it. And I hope that you will learn through experience now with the company of this piece and this wonderful artist. Thanks for being here. Okay, Mario Moore, welcome to Learning Through Experience.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming. Yesterday we did the art opening of your incredible piece, Black Governors, upstairs in Evans Hall. We're downstairs today in the broadcast studio for a conversation. So I'm hoping that I can learn a little bit more about you, or that you might be willing to repeat some things, because you and I have been in conversation, I think have become friends over these several years that we've been in conversation and kind of co-creating the idea of what was going to happen here. But let me start with a little bit of a background question.
Okay.
This is learning through experience. So what's an experience, or how do you think about how you came to this pathway?
It really has to do with my mom. So, I grew up in Detroit. My mom's an artist. She's still a maker. And for me, the idea of her, approaching a white canvas or a piece of paper and creating something out of nothing was, this magic trick that I thought was incredible. So, since I was a kid, it was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to make things. And she would, when she was in college, she had me and my older sister. So sometimes, couldn't get a babysitter, or my dad would also be working, so we would go to class with her. So I'm sitting there in a college art classroom, 4 or 5 years old, drawing with the college kids. And it was something for me that kind of just felt like it was always there, and it was the thing where this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So it just progressed from there, of drawing to eventually painting and sculpture, and I think also, right, how I got here, right, how I got to even the piece for this school, I think about my grandmother, and she's a education activist in Detroit, and I would go on marches with her. We would go to the Selma March for the bridge, and I would do that. So just growing up as a kid, and her always taking me to all these these events, these marches, these protests. It was just a consistent thing. So I think the art and the kind of the content and brilliance of my grandma kind of just combined in this way for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like you became an artist by immersion in the arts young,
Yeah.
but there was also immersion in activism.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like kind of strong family, kind of patterns around activity in both of these fronts. Now, my mother's a nurse, so I thought I was going to be a health practitioner.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah,
Really?
yeah. So I grew up thinking like, you do what your family does.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I thought I was going to go to medical school. But you grew up in the arts and in activism. Is that an accurate way to tell the story?
No, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think also growing up in Detroit in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, which was like one of the worst times for the city. You saw a lot of poverty, you saw a lot of problems, and I think for me there was no down. It couldn't get any worse. So all I could see was the possibilities of what could be, right? You hear about the golden days, you heard about Motown, you heard about how all these buildings used to exist and all this kind of things. And for me, you start to, dream as a kid on like, man, that must have been amazing. I wonder what's possible, and I think, starting there, right, and seeing what's around you, it just makes, at least for me, to imagine, right? Also the idea of hope, but also seeing the problems and being like critical of those problems and asking the question why. Like when you go across a certain county line, right, and the whole landscape changes, versus being within the city of Detroit and then leaving to the suburbs and everything's clean and nice, and and you start to ask the questions of why, and so
that social comparison.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
But other people would talk about being immersed in an environment that's kind of at the bottom of the barrel, kind of like if things couldn't get any worse, as an experience of trauma that would be depressing. But you're telling a story of like, it made me think about what was possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's that I think for me the thing was also being in art. Like my mom being really creative. She has a boisterous personality. We would, I like to tell the story that, hanging out with her art friends, we're going to everybody's studio. It's so much of pigments and turpentines and everything a kid shouldn't be smelling and sniffing, But there was this idea of like, you make things. So you make things happen that don't exist, right? You're creating something. And I think that just tied into my mindset of growing up in a urban city where all the money was taken away from that community. The population got drastically depleted, and as a maker, it's like, well, I can imagine and make the city that I want to see, right? Or I can imagine those possibilities, right? Even though I didn't have any money, right? But the idea of being an artist is that you create those things.
Yeah. I mean, I so love that energy. My area here is I chair the art committee, but I'm not an expert in the arts. But part of how I come into this is because I really am interested in individual agency in context to be able to create what might be. And so I resonate so much with a lot of what you're saying, and love the energy of like we're all makers in some in some way. So did you go to an arts education? I mean, I kind of get the home picture and the turpentine weekend immersion with friends. I love it. Was there also a formal pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to the same undergrad college that my mom went to, College for Creative Studies in Detroit. I I remember being in elementary and middle school. I had a great middle school art teacher, Mr. Michaels. I went to a Afrocentric school, Malcolm X Academy, but he was the only white guy teaching at that school. He was amazing. He was the art teacher. He gave me my first art book, and I still have that book in my studio now. You know, so it was a certain kind of tradition that I was following, but I also like to say, you know, I've been going to college since I was like 4 years old, right? Like, because my mom would take me and we would kind of have to. And then after all of that, I decided I graduated from undergrad in '09, and then I took 2 years off. I was working in the film industry, actually. I was doing set sculpture. So I was, you know, sculpting these huge fake rocks, trees, all kind of different stuff for Hollywood movies. There was a really big film incentive in Michigan. So a lot of the Hollywood movies were coming there because they were getting a tax break. I worked on a movie called Real Steel with Hugh Jackman, and I worked on a remake of an 80s movie called Red Dawn. And I was making a whole bunch of stuff that nobody pays attention to in movies.
Wow.
You
like,
know,
like what?
Like caves, but all out of
wow.
foam. You know, most of the things that they use that seems to be realistic are totally you know, handmade things because they want to get a certain kind of shot. They need a certain amount of safety. But after doing that, I realized all my time was gone, right? Like you work from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then, you know, you work the weekends too, right? Because everything's going over budget. So, and then people are trying to make more money, so they're trying to make things go over budget. So you don't really have time for yourself, right? And for me, I didn't have time to create my own stuff. And that was really important. You know, this idea that I want to make my own things.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided, I was like, okay, I should go to grad school.
Okay.
So then I came to Yale, and it was amazing, and I got my MFA in 2013.
Wonderful. Well, it's amazing to have you here in all of the ways that you are a maker in the world, and as an alum of the school out there in the world doing this work. Can I ask you a little bit about where your work started, at least after Yale, and how you see that picture evolving?
Yeah. Right after Yale, like my work, I think a lot of the work that I was doing in the program had a lot to do with experimentation. At this time, I mean, social media was kind of just kickstarting, like Instagram and all those things, and there was, you know, we had Rob Storr and a couple other people, and you didn't really share things like that. It's totally different now for grad students where they share everything they make. But for me, it was like, this is the time to experiment. So I was making a whole bunch of stuff. You know, I wasn't really concerned with trying to make something that I could make money from. I was more concerned in trying to explore all the things in my head where I could get feedback from it. So a lot of that work, different ideas came out that I still use to this day. Like, you know, in this painting in particular, this white American bulldog, and you know, that was something that I explored in grad school as a symbol, you know, and then it just grows, and you see how much further you can explore that idea. But for the most part, my painting style was all over the place. I was doing a little bit of this. I was painting, you know, sometimes in a very smooth style, and then sometimes in a very kind of like loose and one layer of paint style, and just kind of, you know, exploring. I worked a couple of jobs after grad school, and then I got my first artist residency, at a place called Knox College, which is in the middle of Illinois. Very small town, but it was amazing. I got a studio. This was like my first like studio space out of grad school. I taught an advanced painting class that I created, and you know, that's actually where I made this painting.
So should we talk about this painting
Yeah.
while you're referencing it? Because you're
Yeah.
also talking about this American Bulldog that you started to use, it sounds like, in graduate school. Tell a little bit about that.
So the painting is titled PTSD for a Lifetime, it seems. And for me, again, thinking about the urban environment, thinking about money taking out of certain neighborhoods and spaces, and that's ultimately filled in other ways, right? Like it's the thing about Detroit and a lot of the cities, Atlanta, actually a lot of New York, lots and lots of churches in urban neighborhoods. So you got, I don't know if the congregation didn't like the other church, and they decided they had to build 3 next to each other, but that was a thing, And then the other thing that kind of supplanted grocery stores and the need of food became liquor stores, and they kind of really populated, the space, and the painting for me was really like showing what's kind of being taken away from the community when you get into certain neighborhoods, and also the idea of the young Black child and this idea of possibilities and growth, and ultimately that almost being depleted. So I started using this white American Bulldog, and the dog, being bred from a British Bulldog, I use it as a symbol, right? That mimics the kind of colonial period, right? That America comes from Britain, right? The colonies that these immigrants came over, and they started the colonies in America. And usually, if you see that dog in a painting of mine, except for one, and particularly in this one, the dog is asleep or ignoring some big issue that's happening right above it, which is this crying boy.
Yeah. Okay. And the crying boy is right front and right center, but also a little shadowed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because also the thing I love about painting is that you can play with the depth, and you could talk about multiple stories within the story. Like I'm fascinated when I go to museums. I want to be able to come back to a painting and find something new every time that I didn't see before. So it's almost like these windows become other areas for me to make another painting.
Right.
For me to explore that depth. There's also a small drawing within the painting that's on the floor, and this drawing, you can imagine, if you're looking at the painting, is made by this child. That could be what's happening. It couldn't be. And the drawing is actually a little child's drawing of a police officer shooting a Black boy in the back as he's running away, right? And these were stories that, and actual moments that we were seeing in 2019, 2015, 2016, over and over again. So it's like imagining what that's like from a child's perspective, and then putting that in that space, in this kind of dark space, right? Where the light that's outside of that dark space are these things, right? The church, the liquor store, right?
Yeah.
As that's the the little moment of hope in some kind of weird way.
Yeah. I mean, there's this. So I've spent time with this piece this week in 3 different times. When you first sent me the deck that we were planning to look at yesterday when we did the opening, and you talked about this piece, and today just looking at it with you now, and it's just getting so deeper for me each time, and so part of what I hope that people will listen to in this show is a kind of an invitation to sit with letting yourself have a journey with a piece. And
absolutely,
we're also now talking about your journey, and so this is relatively early in your work. You made a reference to except one piece with the American Bulldog. Should we talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So that painting. So there's one painting This painting is actually owned by the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's in their permanent collection. It's on display right now. It's a painting of a group of friends essentially sitting at a table.
Okay.
And it's me and 3 other figures. One, and they're all artists and painters. It's Titus Kaffar, Mark Gibson, and Jamia Richmond Edwards. And we're sitting at this, this table. It's actually an imagined space because it's never happened in real life, because I made this painting during COVID. But it's based on this idea of this tradition of Dutch governors' paintings, right? If you go to Amsterdam, or if you go to any Dutch gallery in a museum in America, for the most part, you probably will see these governors' paintings. So there's a series of people who basically are orchestrating the society that they exist in, and they're planning at a table.
Okay.
So I wanted to create a table where me and my artist friends were getting together and we were planning something, right? It's up
what
to
might be.
Exactly. And this is the one moment where the American Bulldog is standing at the doorway, and it's staying at attention, and it's looking in and looking directly out at the viewer. And the reason why is because Black people are planning something. So it's not going to be sleeping and ignoring. No, it's going to be paying attention because some kind of action is being taken.
Right.
Yeah.
Inattention in most of your pieces from the American Bulldog.
Absolutely.
But presence, strong central presence, and vigilance in this piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How about if we talk a little bit about your process of creation?
Yeah, I want to say it's the same usually, but I don't think that would be true. I feel like every piece has a different kind of starting point, right, in my mind. But usually, for the most part, right, I come up with an idea. And the idea generates something which for me is like, okay, now I'm going to do a rough sketch. And the sketch is not the sketch that you actually will see. The first sketch is a whole bunch of scribbles that make sense to me and nobody else. But it's really trying to get an idea of the composition. Like, what will this look like? Like, how do I make sense of all these things coming together? And then what I usually do is I take a series of photographs, and then I also take images from research and things like that, and I put that all together, and then I do another sketch. And from that, then I'm getting like, okay, this is probably what the painting will look like. And then once I go from that kind of like, if you want to say final sketch, then I actually go to the painting. Okay. But I also feel like as an artist and as a creative, I don't want to translate a one-to-one relationship from my final sketch to my painting. To me, paintings tend to grow, and you need to follow along and let it do its thing. So you'll see actually in the kind of final sketch, preparation for Black Governors, there was part of an image which is right underneath Flora, where there's another portrait. And I didn't go that route. I went with something totally different, right? Because I feel like that's what the painting needed, So yeah, that's generally how I kind of follow along in my process in the studio, and I think in this particular case, in thinking about Black governors, as we were having our conversations, and I really wanted to think about entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs, that we would not necessarily consider, especially in the distant past, right? And people that's operating in the 1810s, 1820s, and late 1700s. I think for a lot of Americans, that's hard to imagine, that you had essentially Black people who had a significant amount of money and that were designing and building and engineering, parts of a city. And as I kind of went further back, I actually started to talk to Michael Moran and at the Binding Key, and he kind of did all the work because this was something he was already working on.
Oh,
So, you know, I just went to him and I was like, hey, any resources that you can provide? He was like, here, take this. This is this person. This is this person. And it was really amazing because usually in my work, I'm the one that has to do all of that, you know, but when it's all there and then I get to do a deeper dive, and that's where I discovered the term Black governors. And for me, that was really fascinating because I didn't know anything about that. I had no idea what that meant. You know, you're thinking maybe Black governors, you know, during the Reconstruction period or something like that, but or a literal Black person that's a governor. But no, this was a term created, and I think really significant to Connecticut, where enslaved and free Black people would elect a leader, and that leader would go and mediate with the, you know, white people, with the white power structure. And, you know, I think finding that out and seeing what that meant was really significant. And I was like, okay, this is something that I can create a piece behind that deals with Black agency and entrepreneurship and ingenuity, you know.
Yeah, I knew nothing about this. I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, so it's fascinating to me that there was this term, Black governors, and I'm learning about it. I know you did, you know, this committed historical research, but it's all just coming together for me, and it feels like there's just so much more to know. But what I trust now from getting to know your pieces is that every time I walk by it, I'll have a deeper relationship with it and learn more, because there are stories within stories.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
can we talk about the piece and the stories within stories? So, where do you want to start?
I think let's start with like the image of Flora, because I think that's really significant. You know, that was something that this silhouetted woman, this was the first is essentially image created of a Black figure in America, and it was this enslaved Connecticut woman. And I wanted to start with that because not only is it a part of Connecticut history, but it's a significant part of image making, you know, and just American history in general, right? And it's something, you know, these were these images usually created, which was like some of the first American pictures, where they would, you know, put a person and then they would shine a light and they would trace the silhouette to create a portrait. And to have one that's done of somebody who was enslaved, you know, it must meant that she was important in a kind of way that we can't imagine or consider, right? For somebody who's enslaved in, I believe it's like 17. I don't want to get the dates wrong, but I know it's the mid 1700s, right? When this thing was made. But I wanted that to be a part of the painting.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you know, from there I started to think about the church, that one of the first Black churches that was created here in Connecticut, and I looked really hard because it's hard to find like the actual first church. The church still exists in New Haven, but it's a new church now, right? And then when you go back and you try to find, okay, what church was before this, it's a different church. But going back, I was able to find the image of the church that they actually funded and built. And these were, this was a Black couple, Margaret and Bias Stanley, and they were other kind of Black governors. And they had the funds to basically start this church. And I wanted to show the significance of that, because churches were also kind of education centers.
Right.
You know, it's Sunday school was not just about learning. It was also, or learning by the Bible, but it was also learning how to read, arithmetic, all those kind of things that I think were needed in those times to create a space for Black people to kind of thrive, right, in ways that we don't really think about. And then the next painting and piece within the piece that I wanted to create was this image of basically the sweeps, which essentially is people who were janitors, right, at Yale, but they dress so fly, like 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 I feel like contemporary clothes, like we just don't do it like we used to, and it's just this group of black men that are like, and that was everyday wear right there, and it probably wasn't even an amazing suit or anything like that, but I think the image was really powerful for me and something that I wanted to include. Yeah, and then it was the Williams Grimes book, and that was something that Michael actually introduced me to, because I didn't know anything about this slave narrative. I just didn't know. And he was like, this is actually the first slave narrative in America, and it's by a Connecticut man. And yeah, I was fascinated, so I wanted to include that.
And is that on the desk?
That's on the desk. That's
Okay.
under like the writing table.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's a this little green book, and he was essentially an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He made money from the sale of this book, right? Not as well known as Frederick Douglass, or which is much later, but still you had to have an entrepreneurial mindset to say, okay, I'm going to write this book about my life and see what I can do with this thing. And I think the biggest thing for me about this painting is actually that I wanted to have all these other images, because I wanted to talk about many things, many different ways of considering black agency, many different ways of considering how people survived, but also how people made money, how people supported each other, how people built together in different ways. And the other thing was not to have a figure that's facing the viewer. So I'm not essentially giving you a very particular face, right? You kind of see a little bit of the side, but it could be anyone, because I wanted to represent the many kind of personas and people that exist in Connecticut history that would be titled Black governors. And that includes somebody that's probably the most well-known person, who's William Lansing. Yeah.
Beautiful. I will have had a chance to, and have done a number of times, start class in front of the piece.
Oh, wow.
Because we had the opening this week, but we put the piece up a little bit ago. And students say things like, I feel like I can see the world through the piece. And so, and they talk about honor.
Wow.
And they talk about the desk. There's a lot of curiosity about the desk.
So this desk actually, so me and my wife, we went to, last year, we decided to have our anniversary in DC. So we went to DC, spent time there. And one part of that was realizing that Frederick Douglass' house was in DC. So we went to visit the house, and I mean, his house was fly. He had it on top of a hill so he can see everything and anybody that was trying to come up. But he had essentially a library or a writing room. So I took a whole bunch of pictures in the house, and that desk kind of comes from Frederick Douglass' writing table, looking at that desk. So that's where that. It's like something I snuck in there. Yeah.
And we have this piece installed in the southwest corner of Evans Hall, and since we're not there right now, just so people know who are listening in, it looks out over Long Wharf.
Yep.
Can you say something about Long Wharf?
Yeah, so it was, again, like just finding out all this amazing information that I had no idea about. William Lansing basically being an engineer, and essentially an engineer and an architect in many ways, right? He designed Long Wharf. He saw a possibility to expand the wharf. And what that did was it, I think, doubled or tripled the population in New Haven. right? It allowed more ships to land. It allowed more export import. It allowed a space for more trade to happen. So a lot more things and people started to come to New Haven because of his design. And finding out that this, a black man in, 1810s and, early 19th century was a part of the progress of New Haven,
Right.
I think was really significant.
Belongs in the story of economic development
Absolutely.
of this place. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, finding that out was like, oh wow, I would love to some way, have a image of the Long Wharf, what it looks like now in a sense, and then kind of contrast that to what could be a home, office space, or something that you would imagine would be in the early 19th century. So it's almost like, he's looking towards the future of his design, or those figures in general are seeing what they kind of created.
Yeah. I love the pulling to the future and the embeddedness in the past as one experience of the piece. There's so many things that we could talk about. What have I not had a chance or thought to ask you that you want to be able to say?
I don't. Well, maybe the top hat. I do like the top hat.
Great. Yeah.
I think the top hat is funny because I think I showed my dad the painting and he saw the top hat and he immediately thought about Lincoln. Because the top hat is such a Lincoln famous thing. But it was the style of the day and it's what everybody was wearing. I had fun with it in different ways. But I think that's also the part of making, right? As an artist, is to have fun, is to enjoy yourself, right? For me, I was talking to an artist friend yesterday actually, and we were talking about the idea of exploration in the studio, and that for me, I can get bored really easy when I'm making, so it's always about challenging myself in the best way possible so that I continue to have fun. So I'm not making the same thing over and over again, for years on end. It's like, okay, I want to do a little bit of this, I want to do a little bit of that, I want to paint this way and that way. And I think that's another reason why I like the idea of multiple paintings within paintings, is because it allows a space for you to like, oh, I can paint this little picture within this other picture in a different way that I painted this other picture, So I think, as an artist, it's like the idea to explore, but also enjoy while you're doing it, which can get hard with like gallery demands and deadlines and all that kind of stuff. But you gotta keep that some kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So amazing. I mean, I could do this for hours, but for me, in the center of the piece, I'm very interested in the center of your pieces right now, and what you're centering, where the gaze goes. But I'm always pulled to these two, I don't know what they're called, but right around the kind of the tails, he's got these two buttons.
Yes,
right?
yes. I was looking at fashion. I did a lot of studies on fashion from that time period, and coats and jackets, and I think as an artist, when you're thinking about a composition, it's like you're focused on certain points. I don't like to really put anything in the middle of a painting, but in this one in particular, I believe it works. And the reason it works is because most of the composition is all at a diagonal. So even though the figure's in the center, it doesn't feel like he's in the center of the painting. But those buttons kind of like lock it in, and then they draw your eye to the yellow wall right next to it, right? So it creates this kind of continual circle that your eye kind of flows through with the warmth of the painting. So I think it works.
Yeah, and the other association that I would have with it, at least today in this moment right now, is it's on a kind of vulnerable part of the body and yet a really strong part of the body, and because it's on a kind of black governor, and for me this work and the impact in the building is an invitation into leadership and agency, and so there's a power and peril in that, and somehow this anchors that conversation. So maybe a place that that's something that I want to be able to say in this show is for congratulations. I think you brought to life something I couldn't have even imagined. But this has been such a satisfying process, and I feel really honored to know you and to have this piece in my everyday.